Applied quantum computing. So this slide is probably a bit redundant given who I'm talking to. You've all been participating over the last, well, over a year anyway now in the lecture series and seminar series. So you already are well aware that quantum computing is awesome. And in particular, quantum computing is reaching a really interesting point in its sort of development of the hardware. The systems that are now being made available through the vendors like IBM and Honeywell and Google and others are now getting to a scale and a size beyond which we could efficiently simulate with classical computers. So the machines are now, the machines that we can access are now able to perform in ways that we can't that we can't simulate classically, that we can't reproduce with a classical computer. So the interesting question now, sort of the million dollar question now, is can we do something useful with these near-term, noisy, intermediate-scale quantum computers that exceeds our ability to perform with classical computers? And so the jury is, I think, still out on that, although there's a lot of promise and a lot of reason to be optimistic that we, in the next, in the short term, we'll be able to, short to medium term, we'll be able to find some commercially impactful, useful things that these NISQ quantum computers can outperform what we're able to do with classical computing. And at the same time, of course, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that we're on this long, steady march towards eventually having scalable, fault-tolerant quantum computers with millions of physical qubits. And we've seen through the lecture series and some of the seminar series the kinds of things that we expect to be able to do with those. However, there's still a lot to be learned about potential applications of those long-term scalable fault-tolerant quantum computers, as well as a lot of software work that needs to be done to enable those computers to become a reality, error-correcting codes and compilers and all that sort of stuff. So that's sort of the state of the art, and that's kind of, I guess, the picture today that's motivating and driving the new program at NRC. So this, again, you all know this slide very well from over the last year learning about it, but I've put this up here to describe the program's scope. So for us, applied quantum computing, or for this program, applied quantum computing means software, quantum software, if you will. And that obviously includes and ultimately is driven by the application layer. So potential applications that can run on quantum computers that can address one or more of these, well, hopefully several of these application areas. We've talked about optimization with a range of sectors that rely on optimization problems: machine learning, drug discovery, materials design, cybersecurity, simulations, all that sort of stuff. The application layer, and the application layer, of course, being driven by quantum algorithms, or also in scope for the program is potentially approaches to computing that are sort of adjacent to or related to quantum computing, what we might call quantum inspired algorithms. And the idea being that if we're thinking about how to solve a problem using a quantum computer, that may inspire new classical approaches to solving the problem that may yield improvements over the sort of traditional classical techniques that we've been using for historically. And hybrid really is just a buzzword that means, as we know, that problems, real world commercial problems, are complex animals with many different aspects, and a quantum computer is going to not be a wholesale replacement for all of classical computing to solve those problems. It's going to be sort of a surgical tool that you pull out to address particular structures within large complicated problems where a quantum computer might provide a benefit. And hybrid really is just an acknowledgement that any real practical computing solution is going to have obviously elements of classical and quantum computing approaches. Deeper down the stack, there's also a whole bunch of other software, quantum software, what we would call quantum software pieces. There's, as we saw in the lecture series, there's the various programming languages, and each of the vendors have their own favorite shiny toolkit, Qiskit or Q#, or D-Wave has its Ocean, all that sort of stuff. And then obviously that's all very, very important, and is being developed quite significantly. One of the ways to look at that stuff, however, is that it might be a little bit early for some of that stuff to take it too far, because in some sense, we talked about this in one of the office hours, actually. That was an interesting discussion, but some of the having a robust programming language and that sort of tooling is probably more relevant when you have a more of a general purpose computing paradigm with a rich set of primitives that you're gluing together in various ways to solve problems. And computer programming is almost as much an art as a science. But quantum computing is perhaps not quite there yet. There are only a handful of sort of what we might call primitives, but as quantum computing matures and the tools, the quantum computing sort of conceptual algorithmic tools become more rich and more varied, those sorts of things will be more important. But probably more impactful in the near immediate terms are work even deeper down the software stack, quantum compilers, quantum error correction, for example. I see those elements as being about making the most efficient use of every possible physical qubit that you have access to. As we've seen, physical qubits have been a bit slow and steady to scale. And at this point, we're talking about quantum computers with in the low hundreds of qubits. And so we need to be sure that we're squeezing every qubit for every drop. And so the most efficient compilers, the most efficient error correcting codes that are tied to the hardware in the sense that they are optimized for the particular quantum computer hardware architectures that we're using as possible. So all that stuff, all that work in all those areas is included in the program scope, all that software work. What's not included in the program scope really is the hardware platforms, the platforms on which all of these things run. So the program is not about building new quantum computing devices. That's obviously very important, but there are other programs that will tackle those hardware elements. So we've got a new challenge program coming at NRC. So what is a challenge program? In about 2018, as part of the government's innovation agenda, NRC was given or was mandated to have a new set of programs under an umbrella called CSTIP, which stands for Collaborative Science and Technology Innovation Programs. And this was a bit of a new structure for NRC, and it's executed through what we call challenge programs. And a challenge program is a collaborative R&D program that brings together researchers from within NRC to work on projects with researchers from the community, from the academic and the startup commercial communities. And what the programs bring, what a challenge program brings, is grants and contributions funding that can offset the research costs of our partners. And so there are already a number of challenge programs that over the last 3 years or so have been stood up and launched. There's a couple of different AI focused challenge programs. There's a quantum sensors challenge program that we launched last year. And there's a high throughput secure networks challenge program that interestingly actually has some quantum elements to it, QKD type work. And so this new one's going to be on applied quantum computing on the sort of scope that I just described. One of the ways in which this new challenge program may be different or be a little bit different than what was done in previous challenge programs is that we really want to bring in researchers from other government departments to participate in the projects. Of course, other government departments will not be eligible for the GNC, for the grants and contributions funding, but there are other ways in which participation in the program by other departments will benefit not only the program, obviously, but also benefit researchers from those departments and help to bring together the government as a community of practice and working on interesting projects. The overall envelope, funding envelope for the program has yet to be officially approved. There's the National Quantum Strategy Treasury Board submission that still has to be approved. So I won't say on this call what that number is, but rather I'll give you a rough idea of a kind of project of the sort of what would it be an average project that would be funded early in the program. Early in the program, we're going to probably lean towards a larger number of smaller investments, a larger number of shorter projects that are smaller in scope, and then gradually shift as the program progresses over its 6 years to a smaller number of larger investments, larger projects. So early in the program, you can expect a typical project, let's say a project with 1 or 2 government partners and let's say 1 recipient organization. An average project will probably be early in the program 1 or 2 years, and would typically have on the order of between 100 to 200,000 a year in grants and contributions to pay for postdoc salaries, for example, would be a typical way where we would pay the salary of a postdoc or a PhD student or a startup researcher who's working for the time that they're working on a project with us. So that gives you a rough idea. Of course, there's a range, and the range that is sort of just a narrow part of the range. There can be projects that are even bigger than that. And there can be projects that are even smaller than that, but that would be sort of typical. Let's see. So I talked about the technical scope. These challenge programs are typically organized around technology themes. And in this case, it's useful to have these identified. They're not meant to constrain the program in any particular way. They're not meant to limit the kinds of things that we are interested in. They're really meant as conceptual buckets to organize our thinking, to organize the program around. So I see three very broad themes for the program. One is applications of quantum computers to simulate physical systems. And so as we have seen, that's a very compelling use case for quantum computers, is to simulate quantum materials, for example, or to simulate physical processes like perhaps protein folding or molecular processes or electronic processes, or to simulate any physical process where a quantum mechanical component to the simulation is important. And so for drug discovery, for advanced materials design, for perhaps for problems related to carbon capture, or et cetera, et cetera. So that's one. The second program technology theme would be more about traditional computer science applications of quantum computers. So there I'm thinking about optimization, or using quantum computers to solve equations, to solve differential equations or systems of linear equations, or using quantum computers for machine learning, to augment aspects of machine learning, et cetera, et cetera. And then the third, and so those first two are really about this sort of applications layer, if you will. The third theme is, I think, kind of the coolest theme, and it's more about all the other stuff in the software stack there, and as well as looking at different models and architectures of quantum computers. So different models, thinking about things like, of course, quantum annealing or Gaussian boson sampling, or things like measurement-based quantum computing, for example. Or there are still new ideas that are being explored. There's a professor in Calgary interested in neuromorphic quantum computing, for example. So all that stuff would go into that bucket, as well as when we're talking about architectures, thinking about, as we're gradually working towards building and building larger, more powerful quantum computers, in the near term, we may have architectures that have restricted architectures of quantum computers that have limited qubit connectivity, for example, and having the best error correcting codes and figuring out the most efficient way to achieve universality in these restricted architectures would be very important. And so all that sort of theory work is in scope and important for the program. So all that other stuff goes in that third bucket, and that is really meant to be an open-ended bucket with a lot of flexibility to do really important theory work that's going to help us get to practical applications and practical quantum advantage in the near term. Okay, we've talked about commercialization. This slide really is just to sort of signal that supporting the growth of a robust commercial sector, quantum software sector in Canada is going to be one of the foci of the program. We're going to be very interested to work on projects with our startups in Canada. We have quite in fact, by one count of data that I put together in the summer, and I aggregated from a number of sources, it seemed by that data that we had more quantum software focused startups than any country in the world, which is actually pretty remarkable. Projects with SME, small medium enterprise, are definitely, and those organizations are eligible to be recipients for program funding. So we hope to have as a program, especially as the program progresses, a growing number of projects involving startups. Projects do not have to have, projects can have one recipient organization. We call them a recipient organization. Those are the partners that are eligible for G&C funding. So a project can be with a particular university group, or it could be with a particular company, or there can be projects that have multiple partners. So you could have a project that has, research groups from, say, 2 different universities, or from a university and a startup, for example. So there is flexibility there in how the project teams look, as well as hopefully with researchers from other government departments from across the public service. I know that the Bank of Canada has people who are interested in participating in projects. Stats Canada, I believe. D&D, of course, are working on D&D via DRDC are working on a roadmap for applications of quantum computing. NRC, I hope, certainly will have some interest in exploring this. So other government departments will be very, very welcome to participate in program projects. And if for you who are listening in on this from those departments, from any Government of Canada department, please reach out to me directly by email anytime to discuss how your involvement. So a couple more things I wanted to say about sort of the philosophy of the program and things that we want to use the program to enrich or to support. And one is this idea of HQP. So the national quantum strategy is being organized around three main pillars. One is talent development, HQP, highly qualified personnel. The other is the commercial ecosystem, commercialization, and the other is fundamental research. And for HQP, the main approach is really, I think, from the national quantum strategy perspective, is going to be around programs like MyTax or NSERC Create or those sorts of things. But when you talk to, I think that HQP and software sector are very closely linked and very closely correlated, because when you talk to, the CEOs of our startups, one of the things that they will say and do say is that one of the biggest challenges for companies now is to retain the best research talent. And it is particularly difficult these days in a climate where companies like IBM and Honeywell and Google, multinational companies, can offer the best researchers very compelling compensation packages, and so they are attracting away some of our best researchers from otherwise maybe staying in Canada. So while we won't be able to use the program to compete with those kinds of salaries for these people, we're hoping we can use the program to provide other incentives and appealing opportunities for our best early career researchers to work on sequences of projects, to work with a range of researchers from within academia, as well as from some of our startups, and perhaps perhaps for them a more interesting and varied experience than they would get in a typical university postdoc arrangement, as well as hopefully we will be working with the new Quantum Algorithms Institute in BC as well, trying to develop the talent, the research talent, with more skills and experience that will be useful if they wanted to think about perhaps starting their own company. And that would be a huge win for the program if we can help to incentivize some of these researchers to start their own companies in Canada. And then the last thing I wanted to say about sort of the program spirit philosophy is around bringing collaborations and really supporting collaborations, not only with quantum computing experts from the community and within government, but also really bringing in sustained deep collaborations with problem domain experts. And again, when I talk to the CEOs of our startups, one of the things that I hear again and again is that one of the challenges for quantum algorithms research, quantum applications research, has been that it really, for the last 20 years has been mainly sort of bottom up. It's been from the first have a deep understanding of quantum computing and quantum information, and then you bring in ideas for how to use those tools to solve certain structures and mathematical problems. But you look at some of the algorithms that have been discovered; they're all very sort of abstractly framed, and they're very specific to a particular mathematical problem. What hasn't happened enough probably is to have people with really deep understanding of problems in particular application domains. So for example, people who really understand computational finance, not only from the mathematical perspective of the problems, but also from a practical, in practice perspective of what really are the computational bottlenecks in those problems. What does it make sense to speed up and what doesn't it, because it's not really the bottleneck. And then within those, helping to people who have the domain expertise that they can take to start to help collaborate on prying those problems apart, pulling them apart, finding the structures within them that have the most likelihood of being the kinds of structures that quantum computing can exploit. So the program hopes to bring more of those collaborations with domain experts into our projects, and we think a lot of those can come from the government side. NRC, for example, has a number of people that are experts in quantum computing and quantum algorithms, but not a huge number. We are, of course, going to grow that team, and we are going to be hiring a couple of postdocs starting in the new fiscal year. But we do have world-leading experts from a range of application areas, a range of problem domains, and I know that also exists in other government departments. Some of the departments that I mentioned earlier and the ones that I see that are represented here today, you folks have that deep domain knowledge. So even if you don't have quantum computing expertise, there's still be a huge value in having you participate in projects that are looking at trying to apply quantum computing to solve problems in some of those application domains. So please think about that. And again, if you and your department management see an opportunity to do something to explore quantum computing applications for your problem domains, please reach out to me and let's discuss, even if you don't have quantum computing expertise really in-house. So that's the pitch for the program. Really, the main thing I wanted to say is, well, I guess there's two things. One is, again, I would love to see participation from other government departments. So please share this deck. I'll send the actual slide deck around that everyone can see, or maybe I'll just post it on the Google Drive. That's what I'll do. I'll post it up on the Google Drive along with the recording, so that you can grab it and share it with anybody you like. We are getting a call ready to put out probably on the 10th of December. The call will go live on the program webpage, which will ask for expressions of interest for sort of projects from really anybody from the community. Those can also be those expressions of interest can come from other government departments, sketching out what a project would look like, what kind of project you have in mind, who the partners would be, what the level of effort would be, and what other partners you might be looking for, or other expertise you might be looking for in such a project. And an expression of interest at this point is not an application, it's not a project proposal, but it is sort of a project concept, and it's informal. So it's a half page or 1 page, whatever it takes to describe the project idea adequately. It can come directly to me via an email. As I said, there will be a portal to put it on to upload an EOI, an expression of interest, through the program webpage as another vehicle. And we're looking to have these by the middle of January. I think 18th, I think, is when I was going to have the deadline. So the program is going to have an open call for a number of years for projects. And so it's not going to be like once the deadline's done, the doors are closed. But there are a couple of reasons why it would be useful, well, to me and as well to an applicant, to have an expression of interest in early by mid-January, because there are two reasons. One is that I'm going to be using what I have in front of me in middle of January to inform my development of the program proposal, to get the NRC executive approval to launch the program. And so that will be sort of what's on the menu, what's the appetite in the community for projects, and that will help shape what will be the focus areas for the program. So by having an expression of interest in early at that point, it allows you to have some influence over the direction of the program. And two, this is more for the recipients, for the partners who will be eligible for the funding. But those projects that I have an early idea of are going to have probably the first opportunities to go through the full process of completing a more detailed project application, and then being sort of first in the queue for projects that I would launch and fund, or that we would launch and fund early in the fiscal year. So that's the pitch. I'll stop sharing now and take any questions or discussion.